everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, now being broadcasted in color. So, I am talking about another Doctor on Doctor Who, and first time that I've talked about more than one Doctor within a season, so... Yeah, earlier this season I did talk about the second Doctor, played by Patrick Troughton. This time we're going to talk about the third Doctor, played by Jon Pertwee. So, as I mentioned with the second Doctor episode, the Doctor was put on trial by the Time Lords for interfering with time. So, as punishment, the Time Lords forced the Doctor to regenerate. They exiled him to Earth, and they put a lock around his TARDIS. So, that's pretty much where the third Doctor era comes into play. Basically, the majority of the era takes place on Earth, so... And I'll explain more on, the stories that did not take place on Earth as we go along here. So the first story of the Third Doctor era, which is called Spearhead from Space, in it, the Doctor ends up being on Earth and once again encounters the Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who was seen previously in The Web of Fear and The Invasion with the second Doctor. So after helping the Brigadier and units take care of the Autons and the nesting unconsciousness, the Doctor was granted, to be the scientific advisor of units while he's stuck on Earth. And in exchange, the Doctor wants to get his TARDIS fixed, so they're helping him with him on that too. And not only did the third Doctor had the Brigadier and the rest of units alongside him, he also gained a new companion out of this because, as I mentioned in the second Doctor episode, he lost Jamie and Zoe. So, this time around, we have a new companion of his, who unfortunately was only in one season, and her name was Liz Shaw, played by Carolyn John. One of the main reasons why she was cut from the show after season 7, which was the first season of the show to feature the third Doctor, mostly because... Well, according to Christopher Bond from the AV Club, it seems that the producers didn't really know how to handle a strong, smart female character, and yeah, that reason alone was kind of what made her a little bit different from a typical female companion on Doctor Who. So then season 8 rolls around, and the Doctor gets a different companion. This time, her name is Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning. And out of all of the third Doctor's companions, she was the one that was with him the most. She would be with him from season 8 to season 10. So, yeah, she by default, she's already more successful than Liz, so... And season 8 also introduced another recurring villain to Doctor Who. So, in the past, we've had the Daleks, we've had the Cybermen, the Ice Warriors, etc. This time, we have a villain who is also a Time Lord, just like the Doctor. And his name is the Master. So, just like the Doctor, this character is also regenerated a couple of times throughout the show's run. But in this era, he was only played by one actor, and the actor was Roger Delgado. And funny enough, in season 8, every single story of that season had the Master as the villain. I'm not kidding. If you were to watch the entirety of Season 8, the Master always appears in there no matter what. Terror of the Autons, the Mind of Evil, the Claws of Axos, Colony in Space, and the Daemons. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I guess you could technically say this was one of the first times Doctor Who had, a kind of a season-long storyline, I guess you can say, because... With the Master, he first appeared in Terror of the Autons and sort of, tried to terrorize Earth and elsewhere during that whole season. But then at the end of the Daemons, he was caught by units and was arrested, so... Yeah. This was way before Modern Who, so... Yeah, Doctor Who, during the classic run, definitely, did something. And another thing I forgot to mention in my last, Doctor Who episode... not only was there the Brigadier of units, but there were some other recurring characters from that organization as well. The first one, who actually first appeared before the third Doctor era, like I said, forgot to mention him last time, but his name is Benson, and he's played by John Levine. He first appeared in The Invasion with the Second Doctor, and back then he was just referred to as Corporal Benson. But then during the Third Doctor era, he was moved up to being Sergeant Benson. And just like the Brigadier and the rest of units, he would make recurring appearances throughout the Third Doctor era. And then in Season 8, they introduced another recurring member of units by the name of Captain Mike Yates, played by Richard Franklin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a majority of the Third Doctor era took place on Earth. But not every Third Doctor story took place on Earth. During Season 8, we had the first story to not take place entirely on Earth, which was Colony in Space. However, while the Doctor was still exiled, the Time Lords sent him on a mission to go to a planet by the name of Euxarius. It's been a while since I've seen the story. I don't remember how the planet's called. But it was in the year 2472 in order to stop a doomsday weapon from being made. And just like every other story in Season 8, the Master was once again the bad guy. And then we move on to Season 9, where we get the surprising and out-of-nowhere return of Doctor Who's most well-known bad guys, the Daleks. Yes, the Daleks make their first appearance in 5 years on Doctor Who, starting with the Season 9 premiere story, Day of the Daleks. Now, funny enough, this story was originally intended to not have the Daleks in there. However, as soon as the people who worked on Doctor Who were requested to make another story with the Daleks, they had to incorporate the Daleks into the story. Not only that, the crew originally had plans to have the Daleks be in the final story of Season 9. However, instead it was chosen for them to appear in the first story of Season 9. And speaking of the Daleks and the Third Doctor, Pertwee himself surprisingly said he wasn't a huge fan of the Daleks themselves, seeing that, they're not 100% mobile, they don't look super threatening and all that stuff, so probably one of the first cast members to actually say that they're not a huge fan of the Daleks, which is interesting. 2 stories later, in the Sea Devils, the Doctor and Jo go to visit the place that they were keeping the Master prisoner, and the Doctor was worried that, the Master is probably gonna, hypnotize the guards or whatever, which, later on he found out the Master, early on, hypnotized the entire prison to work for him, and gets the Sea Devils to be basically an army, and of course take back Earth from the humans. So, yeah, so after this story, the Master goes back to, running around trying to, cause destruction and chaos. And then we move on to Season 10, which was very fittingly released in 1973, the 10-year anniversary of Doctor Who. And the first story in the season was also made in honor of the 10th anniversary, and it was called The Three Doctors, where in the story, Omega, who was sort of responsible for creating experiments, not experiments, god damn it. So yeah, he was responsible for creating experiments that allow the Time Lords to travel through time, but seeks revenge on them after he was left dead in the universe made of antimatter. So in order to stop him, the Time Lords had to not only need the help of the Third Doctor, but also the Second and First Doctor as well. So yeah, that means the story brought back the Second Doctor, played by Patrick Troughton, and then the First Doctor, played by William Hartnell, and this story would mark William Hartnell's final appearance playing as the First Doctor. After the Third Doctor, as well as the Second and First Doctor, pretty much stop Omega, the Time Lords gave the Doctor the materializing circuit for the TARDIS so he could roam around freely again. So after the Three Doctors, the Doctor once again got his freedom. 2 stories later, we get to Frontier in Space, which is the final Doctor Who story to have the Master, played by Roger Delgado, as unfortunately Delgado himself passed away from a car accident 3 months after Frontier in Space premiered. And in terms of the plot of Frontier in Space, the Master and the Ogrons, which is an alien species that helped the Daleks in Day of the Daleks, they are trying to cause an intergalactic war between the humans and the Draconians. And the Doctor eventually, him and Joe get in to try and stop him. However, it was revealed in the very end, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the story, but it was revealed that both the Master and the Ogrons were actually working for the Daleks, which, seeing that the Ogrons did work for the Daleks in Day of the Daleks, that would make a lot of sense. And plus, Joe earlier in the story did sort of allude to this a little bit when they first saw the Ogrons. She says to the Doctor, "Wait a minute, Doctor, the last time we saw the Ogrons, they were working for the Daleks. Do you think they have something to do with this?" And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this was the only time in the classic series where the Master worked with the Daleks. And, of course, this was the only time Roger Delgado's Master worked with the Daleks, so it was kind of interesting seeing him briefly interact with the Daleks near the very end of Frontier in Space. Even though, weirdly enough, the story didn't really, feel satisfied, like, we have no idea if the humans and the Draconians, made peace again, or... yeah. It was sort of left unfinished, and funny enough, in the next story, Planet of the Daleks was sort of meant to continue off of Frontier in Space, but nothing was really in common between the two stories besides the fact that the Daleks were in there, but yeah. And then on topic with Planet of the Daleks, the story was written by Terry Nation, who, as I've mentioned in the Hartnell episode, was the creator of the Daleks. And not only that, this was his first Dalek story that he wrote for the show since the Daleks' Master Plan all the way in Season 3, so... damn. So then, in the next story, as well as the final story of Season 10, The Green Death, Joe decides to work alongside a guy by the name of Cliff Jones, who was an environmentalist trying to, save the planet. And this is the last story to feature Joe as a companion of the Doctor, as near the very end of the story when, the Doctor units and basically everybody else destroys the maggots, Joe decides to get married with Cliff Jones and move to the Amazon, so, yeah. She left the Doctor, and as a gift, in honor of her and Cliff getting married, the Doctor gives Joe a blue crystal that he found on a planet by the name of Metabilis 3, and yeah, that was kind of how the story ended. One of the more depressing departures, I would say, on the show, and probably, in my opinion, my personal favorite companion departure story on the show, besides the Dalek invasion of Earth with Susan. Then we get to Season 11, the Third Doctor's final season, and it was also the first season to have arguably one of the show's most well-known companions, Sarah Jane Smith, played by Elizabeth Sladen, who made her first appearance in the first story of the season, The Time Warrior, which was also the first story to introduce the Centaurans to the show. So while the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane, were out helping units at different times, as well as, going to other planets and universes to, help defeat the bad guys in those places, Season 11, and in general the Third Doctor era, ends with Planet of the Spiders, where a species of alien spiders, take over human bodies to try and get back the crystal that the Third Doctor stole from Metabilis 3 in The Green Death, and how the Doctor was able to regenerate into the Fourth Doctor. This was caused by, near the very end, where, while being on Metabilis 3, the Doctor gives the crystal to the Great One, who was basically just a giant spider. Being that the story is called Planet of the Spiders, of course. So, while the Doctor tries to warn the Great One about the crystal, she doesn't listen and uses it anyway. However, the forces unleashed from the crystal are too much for her, and yeah, deadly radiation starts flooding the cave, and yeah, the radiation poisoning was sort of why the Third Doctor, eventually regenerates into the Fourth. At the end, the Doctor arrives back on Earth pretty weak from the radiation poisoning, And Sarah Jane, who, of course, like I said, this was her first season as his companion, notices it, and she's worried that she's gonna die. And yeah, another Time Lord comes in and tells her that the Doctor's simply just regenerating into a different body. And the Brigadier was also there, and seeing that he also worked alongside the second Doctor as well, the Brigadier was like, oh god, not again. So, all in all, I guess that's all I gotta say about the Third Doctor era when it comes to the stories themselves. And I might as well start talking about, like, some other production notes to, mention about this era. Now, keep in mind, like I said, this was the first time Doctor Who was broadcasted in color. So, and interestingly enough, I've mentioned previously how the first and second Doctor episodes, some of them are missing. With the third Doctor, it was kind of the same thing. However, later on, eventually, all of his episodes were returned to the BBC. So, and the thing is, some of them are missing in their original PAL color format. So, some of them were either transported with back to the BBC with the NTSC colors, or from a variety of other sources. So while Pertwee stories are like not incomplete like the second and first Doctor are, there definitely is a little bit of missing material here and there. Nowadays, I think the only missing episode from Pertwee's era when it comes to the colorization is part 1 of Invasion of the Dinosaurs, which only exists in black and white, and on the DVD release they did try to their best attempt to colorize part 1, but the blue chromio dot was missing, so it ended up looking kind of weird. So who knows what's going to happen in the future if they're going to try to do some new technology to recolorize that episode, but who knows. And then in terms of the logo of the show and the theme song, the Third Doctor era was the first era of Doctor Who to introduce arguably, like, I would say 2 of the show's most well-known logos from the classic series. The first one lasted between Season 7 and Season 10, and funny enough, this logo would also appear in the 1996 TV movie, as well as most, if not all, merchandise based on classic Doctor Who. And then the one used in Season 11, which also introduced the classic tunnel opening sequence that would later go on to most of the Fourth Doctor era, also introduced another logo with a diamond around Doctor Who. So, yeah, Pertwee's era definitely introduced some of the most well-known logos of the classic series. But not only was the Third Doctor era sort of known for, the 2 most well-known logos of the show, it also introduced a few new monsters who would make recurring appearances in later stories, more so than a lot of the monsters introduced in the Troughton era. So first up, we do have the Autons, who were introduced in Spearhead from Space, and also appeared again in Terror of the Autons in Season 8. And they would also appear in the very first episode of Modern Who, which is called Rose. So, yeah, the Autons definitely, got some recognition after Spearhead from Space. And because of Spearhead from Space alone, they're probably like some of my favorite Doctor Who monsters personally. And not only that, the story after Spearhead from Space, Doctor Who and the Silurians introduced the Silurians, who are sort of sea-dwelling reptilian creatures who originated, were the original owners of Earth before humans took over, and yeah, they also first appeared during the story and also went on to appear in both other stories in Classic Who and Modern Who. And then Time Warrior introduced the Sontarans. Now, funny enough about the Sontarans in terms of their physical appearance, they always sort of remind me of Entrance from the Crash Bandicoot games. I don't know why. Must be like the round head with like the metallic looking body. I don't know. But yeah, the Sontarans are also pretty cool in my opinion. Probably my second favorite new monster to be introduced from the Third Doctor era, besides the Autons. So, yeah, the Sontarans would go on to also make recurring appearances in both Classic Who and Modern Who. Funny enough, this season was also the not the season, the whole entire Pertwee era was the first era of Doctor Who to not have any Cyberman stories at all. Which is kind of interesting. I would have loved to see what Pertwee would have been like against the Cybermen. So, yeah, Pertwee never encountered the Cybermen in any of his stories. However, he would encounter the Cybermen in the Five Doctors special in 1983, which I will go over a little more in detail when I eventually talk about Peter Davison's era. But, yeah, I think for the most part, that's all I gotta say about the Third Doctor era from Doctor Who. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this review of the Third Doctor era from Doctor Who. And if you guys did, feel free to give it a like. Hit subscribe if you want to see more episodes of A Cave from England and just mediocre plush content in general. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, I do my very first editorial episode of A Cave from England, asking the question if one of my favorite stop-motion shows deserves a reboot or not. Or pretty much what I would like to see if it got a reboot.